Welcome back to the Cardiac Cats channel. Today we're going to take a look at some of the upcoming free agents this year and break down whether the Jaguars could look to pursue them or whether they should pass on them. So, to start this off, we've already set up a cap situation for the Jaguars, put together some contracts. This won't necessarily all stay. This is what it could look like if we are keeping players for this next season and not looking to move on from a lot of these guys. So we have Jawaan Taylor as a big name coming back to the team. Evan Ingram obviously coming back. We managed to retain the edge rushers and also got some of the air pieces. And then Blake Hancier is our representation of Calvin Ridley. Reason why we do that is because Calvin Ridley is factored in under the cutoff, and I can't really change that. So I have to add another player with his contract. So we just replicated that with Blake Hance. So, overlooking what we've done with these contracts. Riley Patterson, right off the bat, that's a minimum contract. You're not going to be paying him anything more than that, and if they do, it's going to be practically the exact same number. JaMycal Hasty, it's the same thing there. And depending on what they do this offseason, there's a chance that they do move on from Hasty. I don't think they need to. I think he was plenty good. But I do think that this team will definitely benefit from having a second running back in-house, someone to take over where he's at and use him as the third guy. Calvin Ridley, obviously he's going to be here. They traded for him. They've given him a shot. And hopefully he's going to be reinstated here in about 11 days from the day I'm recording this. Andrew Wingard, there can't really be a doubt there. After everything that happened this year and pretty much the huge role he plays on the team, he's going to be back. We re-signed him to a 2-year, $5 million deal. $2 million hits this year, $3 million the next year. Arden Key and Dawuane Smoot. I could see one of these guys not coming back. But I brought them all back in this scenario. And I believe Dawuane we're paying $8 million, $8.5 million. And the reason why is because Dawuane went down with an Achilles tear. And if they want to keep him going forward, I think the best scenario, you sign him to a 2-year deal because you can backload that. If you sign him to 1 year, it's all going to be this season and it's going to cost you more when you're already cap strapped. But with this deal, you push money back, and you're also paying him probably a little less than what you paid him in the last contract. If we look at his stats even, you'll tell, even though he's obviously become a better player, like sack numbers, pretty much identical over these two stints. So from the time he signed his last deal, which would have been after his 4th year in the NFL, he pretty much matched his numbers from the last 2 years. Went down, I guess, half a sack, but doesn't mean much. So you're looking at a similar deal for him. In Arden Key, I view him pretty similar to Dawuane Smoot. Both players got a lot of potential. They didn't get the huge numbers you were looking for. I think Smoot could have got more if he didn't get hurt. But I think you're getting both those guys on relatively cheap deals. Arden Key was $4 million a year when they brought him in. So I brought him back on 2 years, $9 million. Then we've got Trey Herndon, going to be another veteran minimum guy. He's a good fit for this team, and if you're paying him this much to play for you, you love it. I mean, do we see him as a starter? No. If he has to come in and play the slot, we know he can do that now. But ideally, you want another guy there, and I think that's something they're going to address in the NFL draft. So, getting to the bottom two guys, the biggest contracts we got here, and then we'll actually look at some of these free agents. Evan Ingram, brought him back on 3 years, $29 million. I think it could fluctuate really anywhere in that range. It could even be less than that. But Evan Ingram signed here for $9 million a year. And he proved that he's worth that. He proved, honestly, I think, that he's worth more. But the Jaguars do hold a lot of cards in this scenario. I think it's pretty fair to say that Evan Ingram, while he is a really good football player, I don't think he would be the same player on another team. He has a lot of things going for him here, mainly Doug Peterson, but also obviously Trevor Lawrence. He has a great quarterback, and he's got a head coach that has thrived with tight ends. I mean, he makes a ton of sense to keep on this team. And so a deal is going to get done. The question is really how much is he going to get paid? And regardless, this is going to be your cap number the first year. Final guy, Jawaan Taylor. This is based off of his projection from our website over here on PFF, just showing the free agent rankings and what their contracts could look like. And this was about what we were thinking before too. It's about $14 million a year. I think PFF has him at 14.75, which is really close. We brought him back, I think, for just under $14 million a year. And I think that kind of deal can get done. He wants to stay here. I think he'll understand that this team is going to have to make hard choices and they can't pay everyone what they want. And ultimately, I think they're going to find a way to bring him back. If they can't, I won't be too shocked too. He's probably the most questionable big name guy this offseason. As far as other moves, you've got some restructures you're going to have to make. You're going to see the Jaguars do this almost undoubtedly. Shaquille Griffin's going to be gone. Almost no doubt on that. Roy Robertson Harris. Sorry. Yeah, I said that right. Roy Robertson Harris. This, I will say, there's a way they could keep him and not really get screwed over this year on cap. And how they do that is, and it will probably be a little more than this number, but your dead cap hit right here, what they could do is, I believe, yeah, he's a free agent the next year. So if you want to re-sign him, you could backload a new contract with him and have your first year cap hit be $3 or $4 million. That's an option this team has. He was paid $8 million a year to come here. I personally don't think he is worth that much. He's close, but I think he's a little south. And so, say you pay him 3 years, $18 million, and you pay him, $3 or $4 million the first year. I think you can keep him on that. You're only paying him $1 million more roughly than what you would pay in dead cap if you cut him. That kind of deal could make sense for the Jaguars. So do consider that. That's something they can do here. But in this scenario, we've got him cut. And with Caleb on Chase on, we have him getting traded or getting claimed by another team off waivers. As far as the rest of this, we just got standard cuts, get this roster down to 42. Reason why 51 players will count against the cap, and we have 9 selections. So you want to save 9 roster spots for your draft guys. And then you're also going to need $9.9 million available. So we've got just north of that. This is where we're sitting. Now, as we look at free agents and consider whether they can come here, we're going to have to mess with this a bit. Some of the different things you could see. One could be, say, Jawaan Taylor doesn't get re-signed. You can't make that deal if you want to spend in free agency. Or you're restructuring a contract with another player. Say it's Zay Jones or Rayshon Jenkins. There's some moves this team can make to keep all of these guys and sign other free agents. But what that's going to do is it's going to bring some big questions in 2024. You see here, they are above the cap in this scenario, but you're going to have your draft class thrown on, and you're probably going to have to cut some people. Just the way it's going to be. You restructured a lot of your contracts this year, or they will be. So that's kind of where we're looking. Now that that's all said, let's go ahead and start looking through the free agents. They've got a list of 100 players here. I've got one that I'll mention that's not on this list that I think, and I'll thank my friend Griffin for this, who's been on the prowl, could be a very good fit in Jacksonville. And a guy who, quite frankly, could answer a need on the offense that we don't have an answer to. So we'll go ahead and we'll start, obviously not with quarterbacks, but this is the first guy we'll talk about. That's a big number. I mean, you're paying him a lot of money. But the truth is that the Jaguars, arguably their biggest need this offseason, is to get a really good interior pass rusher. If you were able to sign a player like Javon Hargrave, I think that would be a steal for this team. I think that'd be a huge addition. So, say we're trying to bring in Hargrave to this team. First of all, let's look at how he's done the last few years. And this will give you an idea, if you don't know anything about him, how good of a player this is. 11 sacks this last year in Philadelphia. I mean, he's a huge reason why the Eagles came so close to breaking the regular season sack number. I don't believe they did. They were very close, though. He's just been a monster the last couple of years. And I also, looking at his contract here, I don't know if he'll get that much. He might, but he's also getting up there in age. You see here, he's played quite a few seasons now. He is 29 years old. By the time that we get to free agency, he might be 30, but he's going to be 30 pretty soon, and players do start to fall off around then. So you might see that in his third contract in the NFL. I believe it's his third. Yeah. So who knows if you have to pay him this much. But say you bring him in for that value. So let's throw him in on here. So you're bringing him in for 3 years. Your signing bonus, let's say it's about $18 million. So you're paying him $54 million over these years. So let's say first year, you got veteran minimum. So you still need to make up, I think this will be the number. Make sure this is right. Oh, there we go. So this overall will be about $54 million. You're backloading this contract. You can bring him in to where he's only like $7 million against the cap. You know, and maybe they even do $15 million for the signing bonus. Get this down another $1 million. Well, say we do that. You still are above the cap here, but there's things you got to do. You've got to find a way to get to around $10 million, because that's what you're going to need to sign all of your draft picks. So moves they can make right off the bat. You could decide not to re-sign Jawan Taylor, but I think there's other options you got on here. I think with the way Zay Jones fits with this team and how he played the last year, I mean, I would be comfortable restructuring him. Say you do that, you're up to $7 million. You could also look to sign a new deal with Rayshon Jenkins. He's halfway through his contract. There is an argument that they could cut him to save $6.5 million, but maybe you want to sign a different contract with him. Maybe you want to reset that and push some money down the road. That's an option too. And you could get this cap number way down. So could they bring in a player like this? Yes. However, I don't think that fits what the Jaguars want to do long term. And unfortunately, that's probably going to be the answer for a lot of these big names in free agency. You know, they talked about it after they lost to the Chiefs and they're doing the postseason pressers with like Trent Baalke, Doug Peterson, that this is not going to be a team that builds through free agency. They don't want to do it that way. And that's right. I mean, you need to build through the draft. You need to find your players there and make them a part of this franchise long term. That's the best way they could do it. In last offseason, they had to sign a lot of free agents because this team didn't have enough talent. And so they supplemented it. They made themselves playoff contenders. And, you know, now free agency, unfortunately, is probably not going to be as much fun as it was last year. Now, for some of us, it might not have been too fun when we thought that Christian Kirk was overpaid, but thankfully we were all wrong. So here's just an example of a move they could make. Maybe they go after a big player. I don't think they will. But Javon Hargrave, it's possible to bring him on, as you can see. And that number could go up if we're looking to re-sign Rayshon Jenkins to a different deal. Or heck, you could even just cut like Tyler Shatley off the team. I don't think that's a good idea, but there's options. So we'll remove him, and we'll undo this restructure. Let's go back to this list. So I know Jesse Bates was a name floated around. I'll just touch on this very briefly. I don't think this really makes much sense. The Jaguars already have 2 safeties, and I don't think they need to be paying another safety $15 million a year. It just doesn't add up to me. Now, last offseason, I would have understood if they made a trade for him with how good of a player he is. And especially when you didn't think that Rayshon Jenkins would be a long-term answer. But now, this just doesn't make sense. Kind of like trading for T. Higgins, for example. I mean, as great as it would be, and I wouldn't necessarily complain if they did something like that, because it does make some sense with playing with Lawrence and playing with Etienne again. You've got Zay Jones already. You're kicking one of your highly paid wide receivers to the curb, or you're trading him away. It's like, it doesn't make a ton of logistical sense for the team. Long-term success, it would be good for, but it might send the wrong message making a deal like that. Just like Jalen Ramsey. That's another name to throw in. As much as people want to go back to those days, and some of us don't, Jalen Ramsey just isn't going to fit as far as a mentality standpoint on this team, and maybe he's changed, but it just doesn't make sense. So more players that we're probably not going to be looking at getting, definitely not Orlando Brown. And by the way, this number here, he wants a lot more than that. That's why you're not paying him that, because you're getting a player that's about as good as Cam Robinson, but you're paying him about $8 or $9 million more a year. Next guy we could talk about is Daron Payne. Now, Daron Payne is a really great interior defensive lineman for the Commanders, and he was a guy that almost was traded before the trade deadline this last year. And for, say a second round pick, he could be worth it. But that's probably how you're going to have to acquire him. The Commanders will probably use the franchise tag if they don't re-sign him to a long-term deal. That's just the way that's probably going to go down. Rarely do these teams let these great prospects hit free agency. So we could bring in Daron Payne through a trade, but the reason why I'm not huge on this after looking into it more is, for one, because you're giving up draft capital to go after this player. And second, I watched his interviews. I watched him talk about this season with the Commanders. I just get the feeling that maybe this is more about money to him than it is about necessarily being part of a great team and doing something special like Jacksonville wants to do. Maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong on that. But that's the vibe I got. I was not very impressed with the way he talked about things. I don't necessarily blame him, because Washington's got problems. I feel terrible for that fan base having to endure that. God bless them. But I don't want a player who's just going to be searching for money. It's got to be worth more than that. And obviously this is a job, this is their living, but you got to love the game of football. And not only that, which he does love the game of football, but you got to want to, first and foremost, be a part of your team, want to go win a Super Bowl, and have that as the forefront of your mind, above what you're getting paid. So we'll keep looking through here. And as far as Daron Payne, you're probably looking at a similar, if not more expensive contract than what you would with Javon Hargrave. So keep that in mind. Now we see Jawan Taylor here. This is what I was talking about. I actually had the number wrong. So they had 14.25 per year. If that's what he's getting paid, I'd sign that deal. I think that's a fantastic deal. He was a really good right tackle for the Jaguars. My only concern with him from last year, it's not that he's going to fall off a cliff after a contract year, but it's rather that as a run blocker, I think there's more he can do. And you see this here where they had him with the highest rate of negatively graded run blocks among all tackles in the NFL. Now, PFF isn't always right. Sometimes they're off, and a lot of people have pointed that out, actually, with PFF on this, and especially with the Jaguars. I don't think they're 30th best in run blocking like PFF suggests. But I think there's a lot more they can do there. And so I would still sign Jawaan Taylor for this, but that would be a focal point if I was a coach on that team and what I wanted to see improvement from in his game if he's back with him. So that's where we got the number for this. That's what a lot of people were already thinking as well. So one player that could make sense, especially financially for the Jaguars, if they want to make like a decent splash in free agency, Dalvin Tomlinson could be really good. And what scared me at first reading this, until I read the whole sentence, he started his career off as a nose tackle. And we already have a really good nose tackle in Javon Hargrave. Or not Javon Hargrave, Devon Hamilton. My bad. So you obviously don't want to replace him unless you're getting like an all-world talent. Like Javon Hargrave, which is the name I got that mixed up with. So Dalvin Tomlinson, you'll see here, Minnesota has lined him up in a different spot. So he has more versatility on the defensive line. But he's mainly playing in the interior. And as a player, he's been pretty solid. And he was even someone that a lot of Jaguars fans wanted, I think, 2 years ago when he was hitting free agency. Might be wrong on the years. But, he's a good player. And if you're looking for someone to come in and fill the hole in the middle of the defensive line, I think that's a solid pick for it. I don't know if that's a pick that you're thinking of as a massive strength, but I think you could be confident in it. You're definitely not looking at it as a weakness after. So if they brought in Tomlinson, we already saw what Javon Hargrave looked like. You're probably, what would that be each year? About $7 million almost less that you're spending. More like $6 million. So the first year, you're going to have probably $2 million less. We'll actually just go ahead and put him in here. So we've got about $36 million. Let's say we go after that. Say the signing bonus is $12 million. So say this is your contract with them. That's about $36 million. Right off the bat, you've got to free up $5 million in cap space. So, once again, Jawaan Taylor could get cut. It'd be actually the exact same cap number. Which, by cut, I mean he wouldn't be re-signed. Or you could just look to, restructure Rayshawn Jenkins or Zay Jones. Or just sign a new deal with Rayshawn Jenkins. You could look to renegotiate with another player, like Tyler Shatley. There's some different moves you could do. I think you want to avoid anything with Cam Robinson, Brandon Scherf, or Lorenzo Fatukasi as far as restructuring, because I see those guys as possible trade or cut candidates after next year. Not that that's the way the team is going to go, but I think you need to leave yourself options. Because the next year, someone's gonna have to go. Almost for sure, someone's gonna be moved on from next year as far as a big name. So we've got to have that open for the team. So as you can see, Dalvin Tomlinson could be a forward by the Jaguars. So we'll start moving through the rest of these. It's down at 21. We have another defensive player, and we'll get to some other positions too, but there's a lot of really good interior defensive linemen here, which is great news for the Jaguars, being that that's the biggest need, and that they don't have a ton of options in the draft in the interior of the defense. I mean, really, you've got two guys that could go in the top 5, arguably, with Jalen Carter and Brian Brzee. And after that, you're just kind of taking a shot on someone. Not that no one's going to be good outside of those two players, but it's a little more risky. So Dre'Mont Jones, he would cost about the same as Javon Hargrave, but he's a younger player. He's a guy who'd probably benefit from being a part of a more stable franchise. Crazy thing to say about Jacksonville, but it's true now. He could be a good addition. But, at the same time, he's also more of an edge guy. He does play on the interior, but he's not going to be your kind of guy that's going to be lined up in the very center of the defensive line. Or at least you're not going to see him doing that a whole lot. So, won't talk too much about it, but that's another guy they could go after. It's going to look very similar to Hargrave if they bring him on. So, next person we'll talk about is 28. And this one we actually predicted to the Jaguars in our entire offseason breakdown on our website. Isaac Seumalo. And the reason why I predicted him to the Jaguars, or thought it was possible, is because this is the guy Doug Peterson drafted back in Philadelphia. He's an underrated guard. Sure, we say that about a lot of NFL players that they're underrated, but he really is. He's one of the better guards in the NFL. He's played really well for the Eagles. He's been better every single year. I mean, I think if you move on from either Jawan Taylor or Cam Robinson this offseason, and Robinson would obviously be a trade if they moved on from him, this is a route you could go. Because you look at the contract, you're saving like $3 million a year from what you would pay Taylor. And if it's from Robinson, that's $6 million a year. And you don't have just a ton of great tackles, one good guard, and then a rookie center who's going into his second year now. So things kind of change with this. So if we brought in Seumalo, what would likely happen is you'd probably have Jawan Taylor not coming back or Robinson not coming back. And that money would then go to Seumalo, and you would actually probably have a surplus from that entire transaction. So this is a guy they could go after. And we even see it here. They talk about how for different quarterbacks, Jalen Hurts, Gardner Minshew aren't the same player. He did well protecting for both of them. So maybe this is a guy who could transition pretty quick to a new team. So next guy we'll talk about, got another guard on here. We're not getting either of them. Dalton Risner from the Broncos. This is an option they could take. It would be a cheaper guard option. I still won't take the shot on it, though. I just want to touch on this. Because I think when you're getting into this kind of level of play where the player's not one of the better guys at their position, and maybe some would argue that, Risner's solid. I think when you see that, you're probably better off drafting a guy or having one of your tackles move in the guard. I think that's a better move for the Jaguars. And so I think if they're going to address the offensive line, they need to get someone who they know is a plus starter. And so Risner wouldn't fit the bill for me. Maybe he turns out as that, but I don't think I would bet on that or be extremely confident. And then here we see the Evan Ingram projection. I think this is more of a fair deal if we're not considering what the Jaguars have as leverage and that he wants to stay in Jacksonville. So I don't think that the deal is going to look like this. I think it's going to be a bit less. But, if it is, I wouldn't blame the Jaguars either. This would be worth it. I'd still pay him this. If I had to, I would do it. So now we'll keep going through here. We see the same thing with Arden Key, where it's a higher number. And I don't think you're paying him $9 million a year. I mean, for example, let's look at his stats. Obviously, he's had a lot of pressures this last year, and he came up big in a lot of these big moments late in the year, like forcing a quarterback to get rid of it and it being intercepted. Whatever situation it was. But it wasn't like from his year with the 49ers that he just had this insane breakout. I think we could see that he's primed for it. And for that reason, I think that's why you re-sign him. You get him right before that for a solid deal for your team, and you hope that he outplays it. I just don't think it's going to be $9.25 million. And we'll actually, I think at the very end of this, see almost the exact same thing for Dawuane Smoot, who's coming off the Achilles tear. So now going to the next person, Nate Davis. I think that this could be a guard they look at. Obviously he comes from the Titans. He's going to have some experience knowing, how that team functions, maybe offer something to Jacksonville in that form. But first and foremost, as a run blocker, this guy is really good. He's one of the best in the NFL. And if the Jaguars struggled with anything as an offensive line, if it wasn't Chris Jones, it was the run blocking. I think that's where they can improve the most. And that's where I'd love to see them focus this offseason. I would love to see this team find a really good solution to guard and go get yourself a second tight end who can block. I think if they do that, we'll see ETN have an amazing year, because I think he can be so much better than what he was. I mean, you see it, in games where it's like, he's capable of breaking out against this team, but the offensive line wasn't good enough for him to have a big game, and the team had to revert to the pass. We saw them leave the run a lot this last season. So, you get a guy like Nate Davis, maybe my argument of average guard, you don't want to go after that, kind of seems like an issue here when you see roughly the same projection. But at the same time, he's doing better as a pass blocker. Maybe this is a guy you see as a player who's ascending. And if you do, you see something in him, take a shot on him. $7 million a year, you can do that, but you got to make sure that this guy is going to be good in the long run. And if Nate Davis is, take a shot. So we've got two more players I'll mention on here, and I've got one extra guy who didn't make the list somehow. And we're not getting DJ Chark back, unfortunately. Same with Ngakoue. Got to scroll for a little bit here. It's down at 82. So we're gonna flip over to receiver. So we've got our three starters. We know that. We've got Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk, and we've got Zay Jones. You feel great with that combination of players. I mean, it's really easy to just forget that Ridley didn't play last year. It's going to be fun to watch this team with him. But there's one thing that's still lacking from the receiving room, and that's a speed threat. Parris Campbell, he's a guy who's got a lot of speed, who can break out, and I think he would be a fantastic fit in this offense as someone who's a role player. Someone who's not on the field every play, but when he comes in, he adds another threat on your offense. You need to have multiple ways that you can beat NFL teams. For the Jaguars, I think we talked about the run blocking. You improve that, you can run the ball better. Add your run game to that resume. Get a pass-catching running back. Get like a Kenny McIntosh in the draft. Now they got to worry about that. Get yourself a speed threat at receiver, and now defenses have to worry about that. This guy can take the top off the defense. So Campbell could be a good fit here. And he's also a player that might be cheaper because of the injury issues. That said, he finally had his first full season this last year, and he actually performed pretty well. So actually take a look at his stats real quick, and we'll see the exact opposite actually with our final guy on this list. But he got 623 yards. Before that, though, I mean, look at this. This ain't a whole lot. I mean, he had like roughly double what he had in his first 3 years in the NFL. As far as receptions, he pretty much doubled that too. So I don't think, quite frankly, that he's even going to get this number. Even with how much receivers are valued, that's 1 year and it's 600-something yards. What if the Jaguars get Parris Campbell for, say, $4 or $5 million a year? Would you sign that deal? I think myself, I would. The last guy I mentioned, I would probably prefer him instead. But if it's Campbell, I'd love it. I think that'd be a fantastic fit with this offense. So, the rest of this list, I don't got anyone else I'd be too huge on. We will see at the bottom here. We've got DeJuan Smoot. Same thing here. Huge projection. I don't think he's going to get paid that much. Quite frankly, I don't think he's going to get what he was paid on his last deal with the Jaguars. Just because, even though he looked like he was going to be an improved player by the end of that, he tore his Achilles. And so that's a risk for the Jaguars, and we got to see when he's even going to be available to play. I think he could be ready by the season. I'll have to do more research into that, but we'll see. Hopefully he comes back like James Robinson did, and we don't trade him right after. But the last guy we'll talk about is Mecole Hardman. So Mecole Hardman, receiver for the Chiefs. He was a former, I believe, first-round pick. You see his 40-yard dash time here. He's a fast receiver. He's a guy they've used to take the top off the defense. They've used him as a gadget player. You add him to a Doug Peterson offense, one that functions pretty similar to how the Chiefs do. I mean, if you're going to get close to what the Chiefs do, you're going to do it with Doug Peterson. I mean, these coaches are very similar. Throw Mecole Hardman into this system, plus you quite frankly can look at like the Jaguars like to take risks on guys with injuries. Mecole Hardman fits the bill. You're not going to be paying Mecole Hardman what he was projected to get before this last season. It was like $8 million originally, and then after his start to the year, they were looking at maybe like $11 million a year. But with him being out, I don't know if he comes back to the Chiefs. If they don't re-sign him, what if you get him on a $4 or $5 million deal? I'd lock him up for a few years and use him as a depth player, and heck, maybe he becomes a starter long term. But if you're going to add someone in free agency, I think these are the kind of players you're looking for. You're looking for someone who could ascend, that you can get on a cheap deal, and ideally that you lock up for a bit on a cheap deal. So Mecole Hardman's the last guy I'd throw on that list. And he was actually second round. I got that wrong. But he's an early draft prospect. So that's the last guy I would consider. There's a lot of different ways the Jaguars can go. And we do know that even though they're going to be cash strapped this offseason, they're going to get someone in free agency. It may not be a big name, may not even be a guy that makes $3 million a year. But they're going to make some moves. And so maybe it's some smaller names, but I could see this team making a move for one of the better players available. Not a ton of them, but get someone who's going to be a good fit. Because the way these teams look at it, when you're in the offseason, free agency is to address your issues, and the draft is for talent. You don't want to go into the draft thinking, okay, I need to draft a pass rusher here, and I need to hope that corner falls to this pick. That's not the way you want to look at it. Because what if a guy is on the board who is going to be a Pro Bowler in the future, but you can't select him because you take someone who's going to be average just because they fit your need. That's just not a way teams can operate. So they're going to look to address some of these issues. I think they have a lot of faith in the players on the roster right now and in the building. And I think that's how they're going to look to fix most of this. And the draft is going to be used to just supplement the talent. And they'll probably get one or two guys in free agency. But let me know who you think the Jaguars should go after. Lots they can do. So appreciate you watching this. If you got feedback, see something you'd like on this channel, let me know. I'm all for it. Kind of figuring this out. This is only our third video like this outside of the podcast. So I appreciate you all watching and hope you all have a great rest of your day.